Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Birchfield Penny Arts Center's Book Club at the Center. It's going to be a great night. Everybody's nice and snuggly and cozy in their own home as opposed to traveling to the center in the sleet and apparently the hail that happened earlier today. We have a really interesting author tonight who was a retired cop, private investigator turned novelist. I know we're going to have a wonderful evening with him. As many of you know, our book club started something like 11 or 12 years ago as a docent initiative. We now read novels written by Western New York authors. Our book club is very special because it's one of the few book clubs, although there are many of them in town, this one always has the authors with us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my friend and fellow docent, Linda Dragem, who is going to facilitate tonight's book club and introduce our author. Linda?
Thanks, Mary. Welcome, everybody. I know you're going to enjoy hearing from Dennis because I've enjoyed talking to him and reading his book especially. He is a retired Buffalo policeman, and he is an Army veteran as well. He also became a private investigator, so I'm really curious about that job as well. He based his novel on some of his experiences in the Buffalo Police Department, but as you'll find out, there's a lot of his fiction techniques that he uses. So I welcome you, Dennis, and you want to tell us a little bit more about your background?
Well, thank you, Linda. I guess my writing experience goes back to, 68, 69. It's 1968. When I was in the Army, I was an intelligence analyst and we had to write reports. And that's where I first started writing. Then after the military, I went into the Buffalo Police. And as a detective, we had a lot of paperwork, and it wasn't as creative as a novel. At least they're not supposed to be. So, but yeah, I sharpened my skill there, and I developed the detective skills. Thank goodness, to the Buffalo Police with 25 years from 1973 to 98. And when I retired from the Buffalo Police, it seemed like a natural progression to go into private investigation. And I kind of found a niche with personal injury investigations. The typical car accidents and slip and falls and dog bites and that kind of thing. And that required a lot of writing also with taking statements and that kind of work. But when I first was interested in novel writing or storytelling, it was probably the mid 80s I was inspired by Joseph Wambaugh, who was an author in California, also a detective. But after 14 years, he became so popular, they asked him to leave. People wanted to be arrested just to get his autograph. So, I'm not reaching that kind of fame yet. So, but yeah, I go back to 85, 86 when I first started writing.
I hope you'll both forgive me. I'm going to interrupt for just a minute. I've neglected to introduce my colleague, Michaela Voros, who will explain a little bit about how one asks questions of you, Dennis. So Michaela, I'm going to have you explain that to our guests tonight.
Sure, I'll go through this really quick. So I'm sure most of you have joined us before, but again, just to remind you to ask questions to the author, please use the Q&A section at the bottom. We do have a chat section where you can write as well, but I'll be monitoring the Q&A for any questions you have, and I'll ask them on your behalf. If you're on Facebook watching, you can use the comment section there. I'll be watching that as well. And this is being recorded, so if you don't have time to watch the entire thing, send me an email and I will send you a link. You can also find them all on our website through the Birchfield Connects Watch link. So,
Okay.
Thank you, Michaela.
Dennis?
So where are we going from here, Linda?
Well, I wanted to ask you, Dennis, would you tell about how you wrote to Joseph Wambaugh? And
Yeah, I was a young officer with he had several bestsellers on the market, several made into movies. And like I say, he inspired me to write. And I thought if he could, I could. But it turns out he was in Los Angeles, which is Hollywood. He had the connections I don't have. And the people that could give him the expert assistance, such as editing and publishing and that kind of thing. But back in those days, we didn't have the internet, and I was not prepared for the business end of writing. I mean, I finished my first novel, and I wrote to Joe Wambaugh, and he, a real gentleman, declined to read my novel. He said it wouldn't be ethical. He doesn't want to subliminally steal any of my ideas. But he did give me a letter of introduction to his editor at Dell. And in those days, editors just didn't communicate with newbies, especially with no past track record. But as I was introduced by Mr. Wambaugh, Gene Bernkoff, the editor, did review and give me a 5-page critique, which politely said, garbage. But I mean, she said, if you were a contractor, you should tear this house down and start again. And it was an awful lot of work back in then those days. And plus, I was working second jobs. Police weren't making that much money then. And life got in the way. So I never got back into it till about 10 years later. And I got another story idea, Heir to the Brass Ring, which is still in my head and might actually become a book somewhere down the road. But I got 120 pages done and then got sidelined by work and everything else. And years, decades have passed again. And I kind of gave up writing the idea. I put it on my bucket list. And when when was it? March of 2020, we had that shutdown. All the old guys like me were told to stay in the house, not go out. Law firms were closed. I couldn't go out, interview people, take statements. So I was home doing nothing. And my wife said, do something, get out of my hair. So I went up to my office and I start writing on a whole new idea, a whole new story on March 16th. And on May 18th, 8 weeks later, I had a manuscript. That was marvelous. I mean, the process, it was happy. I enjoyed it. But then I thought the hard part was behind me, but not so much. The business part of writing then, showed its ugly face. And I realized now there's publicity, there's promoting, there's getting an agent, a publisher, and everything that I knew nothing about. So, and today it's still a learning process for me. However, I did find a publisher, NFB Publishing here in Buffalo, North Buffalo. And Mark is, he's a one-man operation and he does a marvelous job. NFB is No Frills Buffalo. And he took my book and got it published. It's on Amazon and in several of the bookstores.
Thank you. Yeah. Good. Yes. The editing and the other work is really quite challenging, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, if I could edit, I probably wouldn't have made all the grammar and punctuation mistakes in the first place.
Mm.
But luckily, I found an editor in Eden, New York. She's a retired librarian,
Mhm.
and it was a few bucks, but it was well worth it. She polished the manuscript up to where it is today.
Mhm. Well, let's get to your book. It's an exciting story. And you want to start with reading a little excerpt from the beginning of the book?
Okay. I am not one for public speaking. I don't like the sound of my own voice. And actually reading out loud, I think pretty much the last time I did it, the audience I had was very young, and it had to do with something with a train that said, "Yes, I can, yes, I can." And then there was a purple dinosaur named Barney, but it was a while ago. But I did have one section here, not to be a spoiler, it's up near the front of the book. It's chapter 1 on page 2, and it's one of the exciting scenes, I think, in the book, which draws the reader in. It was March 15th, 2008, going into the last hour of the tour. Sergeant Al Taylor Jr. knocked on Lieutenant Joe Morgan's door. "Hey, Lute," the sergeant announced as he poked his head into the supervisor's office. "I'm going to make a last check of the beat men. You want to come along?" That night, there were 3 officers assigned to walking posts, one on Ontario Street, another on Tonawanda Avenue, and the third on North Thames Street. It was only minutes after the sergeant and lieutenant stopped to speak with the first 2 beat men that they were on their way to the third, when Sergeant Taylor pulled the squad car up to the side of the Riverside Bodega. "If you don't mind, Lute, I'll just run in for a pack of smokes," Taylor stated. Before the lieutenant's driver could exit the car, Morgan answered, "As a matter of fact, I was going to stop for a quart of milk and a loaf of bread on the way home. I may as well get them now. Go on in, Junior. I'll let the dispatcher know we'll be out of service for a few." 13L to dispatch. "We'll be out of service for a couple minutes at the Riverside Bodega, 1241 North Thames." "Clear, 13L, the dispatcher acknowledged. Morgan followed Taylor into the store. As Sergeant Taylor entered, he observed 3 black males grouped together at the counter facing a Hispanic male clerk. The clerk was drenched with fear and panic. One of the young men turned and displayed a handgun. Before Taylor could react, a single shot rang out. Sergeant Taylor bent forward, grabbing his abdomen just below the bottom of his vest, but he remained on his feet. At the same moment, another of the holdup men flashed a chrome-plated revolver, scurried around the end of the counter, and grabbed the clerk around the neck. "Drop your gun or I'll shoot." "Hear me? Now," he screamed. As Junior Taylor struggled to stay on his feet, his body blocked the doorway, preventing the lieutenant from entering. Morgan's only view of the suspects was over the staggering sergeant's shoulder. Without hesitation, Morgan reached around the sergeant and took his first shot, striking the man who was holding the clerk as a shield. The thug was hit dead center of his forehead, causing him to fall backward, releasing his grip on the clerk and dropping the silver revolver onto the counter as he collapsed to the floor. Morgan was surprised when he heard 2 more shots explode from Taylor's weapon. The sergeant was still hunched forward as he pumped bullets into the floor. Officer Billy Mullins was walking his beat when he heard the shots a half block away from the bodega. He radioed to the dispatcher as he ran. "Shots fired at the bodega on North Thames. Beat 13-3 responding." "You have officers out of service at that location," the dispatcher advised. Just as Officer Mullins reached the entrance to the store, the second suspect let loose with a barrage of bullets from a small caliber automatic. One struck Taylor's vest on the left side of his chest, and the other round hit the top of his head. As the sergeant began to fall forward, Lieutenant Morgan grabbed him by the collar of his coat and swung him into a side aisle out of the line of fire. Morgan then dove behind a display rack at the end of the next aisle. Officer Mullins rushed through the entrance to catch one bullet in his upper thigh, but managed to return fire. The second gunman was hit, but not down. The third robber rushed up to the counter, grabbed the chrome-plated gun that was dropped by his now deceased partner, and disappeared down the rear aisle of the store, throwing a couple shots back over his shoulder. Lieutenant Morgan carefully made his way to the end of the aisle that was parallel with the front windows and peeked around the corner. Clear. He cautiously moved down the adjoining end aisle, peeking around the corner shelf. He checked down the next aisle. Clear. He could hear some mumbling and dragging noise coming from the last parallel aisle, which was along the rear wall of the store. Inch by inch, he crept up to the end of the shelving, bobbed his head around the corner, and saw the second robber lying on his side in a fetal position. As the lieutenant climbed to his feet, the wounded robber looked up toward Morgan. Neither spoke a word. Instinctively, the criminal and the cop knew that their survival depended on the next few seconds. There was no time for trust. The body on the floor started to roll on its other side, revealing a handgun which was being raised and pointed toward Morgan's direction. It was the last bad decision of the thug's short 17 years. By the time Morgan was able to clear the rest of the store, a half dozen backup units had arrived and flooded the street with flashing red and blue lights. The clerk stated that the last robber ran out the rear entrance with a chrome-plated snub-nosed revolver. There was a vague description the suspect broadcast. Black male, 16 to 20 years old, 6 feet tall, medium build, armed with a chrome-plated snub-nosed revolver. Consider armed and dangerous. The third robber was never located that night or any time since.
You. Yes, that really sets the tone for the novel. And I like that you have this all happening on the Ides of March. So as a person fond of Shakespeare, I like that connection. Then you move on to this nice, this tender scene with the family. And this all connects up later in the book with the motive for the terrible tragedy that happens with Lieutenant Morgan's grandson. And that's
Lieutenant Morgan, by that time,
captain, right?
becomes a captain and chief of homicide.
Uh-huh.
And then that he's retired, and his son, Mike Morgan, is now a lieutenant on the department. That might be a little confusing, but there's a time difference in between.
Mm-hmm.
But we find that the grandson is killed in a hit and run accident. And I'm not giving anything away because this is early in the story.
Right.
And then they find out rather soon that it was not an accident, but intentional. And the next thing they find out is a short time after that, they find out the person who is responsible turns up dead. So the question is, if you know who the perpetrator is it a solved case? If that perpetrator turns up dead, is it a closed case? And Joe Morgan says, no, it could have been me they were after, it could have been my son. We have to find out why this happened. And there is the title, Motive.
Mm-hmm. Is that the common procedure in working on a murder, to explore all of the people related to the person who was murdered?
Well, what we did is they tried doing a deep dive to find out who would have a reason to go either after Joe Morgan or his son Mike, or if somebody was actually going after Sean, the boy who was killed. So they split up and tried to work the case backward instead of trying to find out who the perpetrator was and how he connected with the victim. They want to see if there's anybody else that had a motive to commit the crime. So it's kind of doing the investigation backward. But it's unique in that most of them are retired cops, whether they're detectives or supervisors. And their personalities come into play as they interact. And I think it's an engaging story that brings the reader into the police investigation like they are part of it.
Yes, I appreciated that. Do you want to talk a little bit about the coterie? That's your
The
group.
coterie,
Yeah.
yes. Initially, the story was titled The Coterie. And when I had the manuscript done, I asked a few people to read it, get their opinions. And the very first question was, what is a coterie? Or how do you pronounce that? And what is it? And I just figured, well, if people don't know what it is and they can't pronounce it, they're not going to open the cover to see what's inside.
No.
So I figured that was probably a bad title. So I thought it over and I wanted something short and to the point. And the theme of the whole story is to find a motive. So ergo, motive became the title. But the coterie is throughout the whole book. The coterie is a group of friends that go back to their early days on the job 30, 35 years ago. And they've helped each other through the ranks of officer, sergeant, lieutenant, captain to chief. And you'll find out in the future, even beyond that. But I actually chief of detectives too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the coterie is, let's see, specifically.
You put the definition in, yeah.
Yeah. Give me
Yeah.
that book. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you.
You defined it, a group of people interested in the same, I wrote it down.
Yeah, a small group of people with shared interests or taste, especially one that is exclusive of other people, like cops feel they are, i.e. a coterie of friends and advisors. So it's a group of select members. They trust each other, they have each other's backs, and they're lifelong friends. So the coterie, yeah, I had my own through the years, and I think we all have, except we just didn't know it. Or at least we didn't know that's what they were.
Yeah,
But the coterie,
their personalities come out. Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
yeah, well, and some of the personalities are borrowed, some of the traits from the people I worked with through the years.
Mhm.
Some of my bosses, some of the detectives I worked with, and then some of my own personal traits are in there too, like poor Vern, damn water pills. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
like I tell my friends, when I was a young man, I knew where all the bars were. Now I know where all the restrooms are.
Did you have any friends who said they recognized themselves and didn't feel you portrayed them well?
Well, the funny thing is, many of the names of characters. I used the surnames of friends or associates, comrades, other officers that I really respected. And it was my way to pay homage to them by using last names, not their full name, of course. But yeah, they came back and they said, is that what you think I did? Or, is that what you think of me? I said, no, it's a fictitious person. And actually, the only real actual name I used was the name of a lawyer who happens to be my son-in-law, and I made him an assistant district attorney.
Oh, I remember him. Yes. That's interesting. Yeah, they're all very unique. I presume Harry Doyle is based on you. Is that correct?
To a greater part, an old guy. Yeah, he muddles his way through and gets the job done. Not a very polished person, but likable.
Do you want to tell? I would like you to tell folks where the coterie met all the time, because everyone knows this place.
When I was on the burglary task force, it was a 6-week detail that lasted 13 years. So they liked our work. We were very effective. We were plain clothes. We worked nights for the most part. And we would start, we'd hit the street around 10:30, 11 o'clock, and I'll head down to the town restaurant, Elmwood and Allen. And we would meet with George, the owner, and he'd have one section put aside for us. And there was a waitress there. She was like one of the guys, Levon. And I mentioned her in the book, just my way to pay respect. She's been long past now, but she was a character in her own right. But we used to meet there and plan what we're going to do for the night. And then we hit the streets. And then maybe around 4 or 5 in the morning, if it was quiet, we'd stop back in there for coffee again. And so the coterie needs a common place for all the members to get together, so the reader knows how information is being passed from one person to another, and we have a central point for that. So I had them meeting for breakfast Tuesday and Friday mornings, and all the coterie members would come in, or whoever was available, and it was very similar to our getting together at the beginning of the shift. I talked to George, well, not George. George is now gone on to other places, but his son, Dino, runs the town restaurant. So after I got them writing the book and I incorporated the town restaurant, I thought, maybe I should get some permission. So I talked to Dino, and he was happy to authorize me to use the town restaurant for the cover, and use the name of the restaurant throughout the book. As a matter of fact, he suggested that my book launch back in April 17th was at the town restaurant. It brought in a lot of customers for him and provided me with a lot of room to have people come in and meet the author and buy a book.
Great. That's wonderful. Yeah. What about the violence? There's quite a bit of violence in the book. Is that a common experience was that a common experience in your career?
Yeah, well, policing is a messy business. It really is. You'll spend 8 hours, maybe 7 hours riding around trying to stay awake on a midnight shift. And then in a couple minutes, your adrenaline is hitting top level as you're chasing somebody. And then once you get them, people don't want to be caught. So there's usually some sort of struggle, sometimes very violent, sometimes just you get enough of the good guys to overwhelm the 1 or 2 bad guys, and we can take them down without too much problem. But it can be violent. And it can be funny too. I mean, there's a couple instances in the book, and I know Linda, you'll recognize the one with the dog on
Right.
the other side of the fence.
Yes.
That actually happened.
Oh, it did.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell them a little bit about it?
Well, in in that episode, we have one of the coterie members driving with Joe Morgan was a rookie at that time, and he's first assigned to the precinct 8, which back in the day was really known as Bloody 8. It was a different time, and policing was a lot different. But so while he's teaching this young rookie the ropes, and I think it was Vern Chosky that was the older partner.
Yeah.
And so Vern and Joe are answering a burglary call, and instead of going around to the front address, he said, "We're going to go on the alley behind the house." So they start walking toward the house, and he said, "Stop right here. Nice dark shadows on both sides. We'll wait and see who pops out," because the other officers arriving in uniform are going to charge into the yard and flush them over the fence into the alley, which is what happened. So as they start running over the fence, they start running out of the alley. Vern clocks one of them. He goes down, and the other guy sees the two officers. So he jumps, he stops and looks over the fence, and it's like a 6-foot fence. So Vern says, "Please don't make me chase you over the fence." Plants the seed. The guy's up and over the fence. And the next thing you hear is, "Help, help, get the dog, get the dog." And you hear the dog, "Arr, arr, arr." So Vern tells him, "Don't worry, I'm going to send my rookie around to get the owner to bring him in. Hang in there." But yeah, that was
That really happened, huh?
Yeah, it was a funny night. Well, for some people.
Well, you do talk about how in the book you refer to the fact that policing has changed a great deal. The professor at one point goes over what the changes are in policing, and your group of retired guys have to change the way they do things. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, through the years, policing has changed dramatically, especially with technology. Now there's body cameras, there's dash cameras in the car, there's GPS in the car, which is all well and good. When an officer is wearing a body cam, he's less likely to provoke an incident, which has happened in the past, but now is less likely because it's all on tape. The GPS will let the dispatcher know where the car is and for how long. And decades past, guys on a very, very boring Wednesday morning, 4:30, 5 in the morning, one car would stay checking the area while the other car would find a dark alley to what they called cooping and take a nap, because a lot of the guys, once they got off duty, they were going to their second jobs. So, I mean, the technology has changed. Policing has become more regimented, regulated. There's cameras in the station house, so they know when you come in and you go out, how long you're in the station house. So technology is a big plus, I think, for the public and for the police department, but it takes some adapting. When I was on the job on the street, when I first went on the street in '73, we had a gun, 12 rounds of ammunition, a billy club, and a pair of handcuffs. Now they have vests, they have a taser gun, they have their other sidearm, they have 3 or 4 magazines, they have heaven knows what else, the radios. goes up and they click the mic. You know, we didn't have any of that, especially bulletproof vests. But it's so different these days. Unfortunately, I think they're underappreciated nowadays.
You and I spoke about that, how police don't get the proper respect. I know I've seen police currently, and I wonder how they can carry that around. It's got to be very, very uncomfortable.
I've seen a few guys and stop to talk to these young kids, and I respectfully say young kids, but I ask them on a flat run chasing an 18-year-old kid who doesn't want to go to jail. How the hell do you catch him? I never could. You know, I mean, without all the gear on, it's more of an equal, race, and we were quite effective. But with all that gear, I have no idea how they do it.
They probably don't, right? Well, one of your comps in your book is what is known as a dirty cop. That was the way he was referred to. Was that based on anyone you knew or knew of?
You're talking about Chuck?
Freddie.
Oh, Freddie. Okay.
Oh,
Well, Chuck also, he left the department because of some
okay.
involvement he got, and he was, it was insinuated that he could either leave or be fired. And
Right.
he left, and he's the one that went to the feds.
To the
Which
Fed.
agency, I have no idea. But
That's a good
Freddie,
thing. Yeah.
yeah, he was a lifelong member of the coterie, and it's one of the I don't know, it's what I believe in a lot in my life is loyalty, and having somebody's back. You take care of your friends, and in this case, and I suspect most people have read the book that are watching, so I don't want any spoiler alerts, but Freddie took it personally about the loss of his son 11 years earlier, when Joe Morgan was a lieutenant at that time. And that's the passage of that I just read.
Right.
But he harbored that illness for 11 years. And then after his wife declined in health due to the loss of their son and some other complications, he went off the deep end, and he turned on Joe Morgan.
Right. But he wasn't based on anyone, was he? You wanted to know?
I did know a couple crooked cops, and they did end up going to jail. Actually, the one guy I worked with in burglary task force, I rode with him for about 6-7 months, and the FBI arrested him for selling stolen property, jewelry. He was fencing. We were in the burglary squad. He was selling stolen property. He was getting it from a fence, and he opened a jewelry store at the Galleria, and he was selling stolen property. So, and I never knew anything about it. He would go to meet the fence and tell me, "Hey, Den, you stay in the car. This guy doesn't want to talk in front of anybody else." So I sat in the car like a dummy, and he went in, made his deals, and made the arrangements, and I knew nothing what was going on. So yeah, that's one of the guys I knew, and there was another one. He got involved in the. He was also in the burglary task force. He ended up going to jail after they had an altercation, and somebody died due to that altercation. It was off duty, but yeah, corruption, brutality. Yeah, it happens.
What your characterization of your group of friends who helped the main character find the motive was very interesting. Were there other writers that inspired you that you had read who you felt defined characters very well?
Linda, you've heard the phrase good readers make good writers?
I have. Mhm.
Yeah, well, it's not always true. I love movies. I don't think in my whole life I read 10 books.
Really?
Well, I remember Bridge over San Luis Rey, A Bell for Adano when I was in high school,
Mhm.
John Hersey.
Sure.
And then, of course, several of the Joseph Wambaugh books.
Mhm.
And then the other two or three were probably textbooks
Mhm.
in college. But I'm not a reader, but I do love movies. And when I sit down to write, this movie is going through my head. And
Ah.
I literally can envision the characters and they're talking to each other. And I'm doing my best because I only type with 3 fingers, you know. So I do my best to keep up taking dictation of these characters up there as they're talking back and forth.
Mhm.
And then I add a little bit of description of what they're doing or where they are. And then they start talking again. I try to keep up.
Mhm.
And I worry about the grammar a little later. As long as I get the movie, the scene down and move on. It just, I
It's interesting.
don't outline.
Mhm. Mhm. That's interesting that you visualize your characters. Yeah.
I'm hoping that comes through when people read Motive, that they can see this movie in their head,
Mhm.
because that's the way it's written,
Mhm.
scene by scene, line, dialogue and all. I try to make it natural and flowing. And I don't, there's a couple chapters that are kind of long, but I try to keep the chapters short for the most part, because
Mhm.
it moves the story along faster.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it does help it move it along. Yeah,
So,
definitely.
yeah, and most people, when they talk in short sentences, not like I am right now, but
Mhm.
uh, yeah, no, and they answer like that. So I don't try to make it too convoluted with dialogue, and that I try to move the story with common phrases like people would talk, at least here in Buffalo.
Right. And I enjoyed all the references to Buffalo, the street names, the places that I know of, and I like that you included that and made it more personal for the reader, for a Buffalonian reading.
What I tried to do there is, I don't think you'll see anywhere mentioned Buffalo, but
Mhm.
people from Buffalo, Western New York, they'll recognize some of the scenes, some of the locations, and they feel the story is their story.
Right.
But by not nailing it down specifically to Buffalo, somebody in Milwaukee might think it's, this here could be over on the west side of Milwaukee here, or Toledo or someplace, it's, so I didn't want to make it one place like New York City or Boston. Buffalo is a great town, but I didn't want to isolate the coterie in that one location.
Mhm. Well, what's next?
Well, how did you like Harry Doyle?
I liked Harry Doyle. Yeah.
Well, Harry Doyle is the main character in the next book.
Ah.
And
Uh-huh.
well, what I'm planning is, initially we had 6 members of the coterie, and I
Uh-huh.
was hoping to do one code, the coterie series will be comprised of one book highlighting or featuring one of the members of the book,
Ah.
of the coterie.
Mhm.
So that would give me 6 books. But I found out as I'm going along, of course, without an outline or a plan, that the coterie is changing. I mean, we see now that Mike Morgan is part of the coterie.
Right.
And Janae Adams.
Mhm,
She's part of the coterie. And there's a Chuck Mason, who's kind of an honorary member.
mhm,
So it has changed. Freddie's not there anymore.
mhm.
And it will change in the future too, in the next book.
Ah.
It's evolving. But yeah, Harry Morgan is gonna, or I'm sorry, Harry Doyle is gonna be the next main character.
Have you started?
Yeah, I got 5, 6 chapters. I'm working on 6th chapter now.
Wow.
And it starts out with a very nice prologue, and it's about Willie Williams
Uh-huh.
when he's 13 years old, and there's another guy, Jake Mazurik, who is also 13, and it's an episode that they have on the international bridge in Riverside, the railroad bridge that goes to Canada.
Mhm.
So that's where the story starts. And then after the prologue, it picks up 35 years later where they are today.
That's great. Oh, interesting. What's your writing process like? Do you have a specific time of day where you write?
Uh, what was my strength is during the lockdown, I had nothing else to do. And I was putting 5 hours, 5.5 hours a day continuous. I think I missed 3 days within that 8 weeks. But I just got into it and I couldn't wait to get back there the next day. Now, my kids were up. My daughter, her husband, and twin boys came up for Thanksgiving from Houston. My son is in London,
Mm.
and the honeydew list is long. So
Uh-huh.
I haven't been putting I want to get to the point where I can write every day for 4 hours. And that hasn't happened yet this year. So I think after January, I'll tell my darling, I'm shutting the door. No offense, stay out. And 4 hours a day anyways.
That sounds good. Right. You can sharpen your pencils. That's what Hemingway did. He would sharpen his pencils and make sure that the last line would be the first line the next day. So that's
Yeah, well, that's what I've been doing is go back 1 or 2 chapters to get into the flow of it again. And then by the time I get to the end where I left off, I know where I'm going. You know,
What about your private investigation? Are you still doing the PI work?
that was getting in the way too. So, and it was a lucrative job, but I want to write, so something had to go. So I'm closing down my PI practice after 20 years. And I've been training 2 other people to take over the law firms. I didn't want to leave them, my clients, leave them high and dry. So I'm training 2 different people. Plus they got to get their notaries and their PI license. And that takes some time. And the one is already working for one law firm. And the other guy, I'm trying to light a fire under his butt. But the attorneys didn't want to let me go. It was like that a mobster movie where he's every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in. These lawyers are doing it to me.
Uh-huh. Oh. So you do the research before they advance their cases. Is that
Yeah, I'll go out there and look for any video, whether it be ring doorbells or security video from businesses, interview people looking for witnesses, taking statements, drawing accident scene diagrams, photos of vehicles, collecting documentation from doctors and hospitals. It's full investigation. But it pays pretty good, but I'm 73. Let the young people have those jobs. Oh, younger. I'm sorry, Michaela, you are younger.
Oh, well, does anyone have any questions for Joe? I'm sure, for Dennis. I'm telling you, Joe Morgan.
That would be an
You
honor.
become Joe.
We don't have any Q&As just yet, but please put your questions in if you have a question for Dennis.
Dennis, would you mind if people might be curious about your experience as a policeman? Is it all right if they ask you
By all
about
means.
policing, or if they want to ask you more about your intelligence work when you were in the Army? So that prepared you for your subsequent career as a policeman, I presume.
Yeah, as an 18-year-old kid, I went and joined the Army. When other people were being drafted, idealistic, patriotic, all that good stuff, but I wanted to go into military police, and you take a test and they tell you what you're qualified for. And they said, yeah, you're qualified for MPs, but there's no openings. Here's a list of whatever you're qualified for. So I looked down and it said military intelligence. Oxymoron, I knew that, but so I said, yeah, I'll take a shot at this. So they sent me to Fort Holabird in Baltimore for military analyst training.
Mhm.
And right from there, shipped us out to Vietnam. When I came back, the last 18 months, I was assigned to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And there I was assigned, I had 4 countries in Africa that were assigned to me for intelligence review.
Wow.
And it was interesting.
Mhm.
But they taught me how to think analytically and how to come up with probabilities and write a good report on what I observed and justify my findings. So I owe the Army a big thank you for that. It could have been worse. I could have been in the infantry carrying a weapon.
Mhm. You didn't see combat. You were on the other end.
I was not directly involved, although our base, we did have mortars and rockets come into our compound several times, but I never had to go out in the field, as it were.
Mhm.
Those were for much more qualified people on those endeavors.
Mhm.
So we do have a couple questions coming through. One of our participants is really curious to sidetrack us from the Army discussion. They're really just interested in the monkey photo you have above your bookshelf.
That was from my grandson. And he said, Papa, this looks like you. Yeah, it was a birthday card, a real big one. And right below it are a couple copies of Motive. So,
Mhm.
but I wanted to tell you something else too.
Mhm.
If you can go to the website, Den, it's lowercase, DEN-ADAMS.com.
Mhm.
That's my website. Click on blog, and then the very first posting will be a Christmas gift. That's for you guys. It's a short story called The Christmas Cop.
Oh.
It's
Oh.
about a 15-minute read. I think you'll enjoy it.
Oh, thank
Hey,
you.
Dennis.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's so nice of you. Yeah.
Thank you, Dennis. That's very sweet. Michaela, there was another question?
Yeah, and I will put that link in the chat in just a moment too. We have another question coming in, wondering if you have ever worked with any other former retired police officers or detectives that are now authors, similar to a former book club author guest, Lisa Marie Redmond.
Well, I know Lisa quite well. She's a bit younger than me. She retired long after I did. And she's on her 6th book right now. Actually, Lisa and I belong to the same writers group. But we meet above the Dog Ears bookstore once a week. And then, we use each other as a sounding board. And, she's a phenomenal writer. I can see why she's got 5 books published, and she's just going strong.
I
Is-
have a quick question for you,
Yeah.
Dennis. Did your fellow cops know that you were interested in writing, and in any way would that have changed the way they viewed you, or were they more guarded around you, or was that a well-kept secret?
Mary, I think it was the late 80s. It was after the time that I wrote to Joe Wambaugh. And we lived in Cheektowaga. I had a little office in the basement. And Dan Herbeck with the Buffalo News.
We've had
Uh,
him.
Yeah,
Right.
We have had him. Mhm.
He came over and interviewed me as an aspiring author, and with Jimmy Gaines, who was a desk lieutenant, I think at Precinct 6. And he was also writing a book. As it turns out, it was a beautiful article, a full page, some pictures. At that time I smoked a pipe and, looked like the author type. So, but it was a nice spread, and neither one of us ever got published. And so, yeah, everybody knew I wanted to write, but I don't think anybody was convinced that either I could write or I was serious. And
Okay.
I wasn't ready for it at that time. Wasn't prepared.
Mhm. So they weren't afraid to show their true side in front of you, because they didn't quite believe in you, but you always believed in yourself,
Oh,
correct?
I love you, Mary. I wish I had that confidence in me. Actually, I kind of gave up on writing, and it was on my bucket list. And when I hit 71, I said, this is not going to happen. I took it out of my mind, off my bucket list. And then last year, the COVID hit, and I was grounded, and I had nothing but time on my hands, and thought, take another shot. And I think that's just what I needed. But getting back to the question, a lot of guys came up to me and said, hey, can you put me in the book?
Oh,
So, yeah,
it had the opposite effect.
yeah, I
They were
had the
auditioning for
support
a
of the
part.
guys on the street. Yeah. And
They were
they
auditioning
always
for a
wanted
part
to
in your
stop and
movie.
they always wanted to stop and tell me stories, and
Mhm.
which I wish I could remember all of them, but there was one officer, Joe Ransford, phenomenal street cop. I mean, he had a mind like you wouldn't believe. A memory. Somebody would be looking for Sharpshooting Willie, nickname, and they put it out over there. Anybody know Sharpshooting Willie? He says, yeah, that's Willie Sherman. He lives at 412 Hopkins. He's drives a 85 Cadillac. I think the plate number is. It's just
Oh my goodness.
phenomenal memory. He was,
Mhm.
but he couldn't write a report to save his life. So, I mean, we all have our strengths, but
Yes,
yeah,
we
Joe
do.
Ransford was, and Joe's a long past now too, but yeah, he's in the book by surname.
Mhm. That's great.
Well, Michaela, any additional questions?
No, not anymore.
Well, I want to
Oh.
just take yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. This is about putting the website address in, and I will refer to that message in the chat.
So I
Yeah.
really want to thank Linda for a really wonderful job tonight. Thank you, Linda. And I'm just delighted that I had a chance to meet you, Dennis. And for those of you who also like a chance to meet Dennis in person, he will be at the center a week from tomorrow between 5 and 7 at our second Friday. There'll be a table set up. You'll have a chance to meet him and get your copy signed if you like. And along with him will be our next book club author, and her name is Clarissa Markowitz. She wrote the book, Christmas and Whimsy, and Clarissa will be presenting to this group on December 16th. Dennis, it's really been a pleasure. I'm looking forward to seeing you again next Friday, and I hope everyone here will be joining us. Thank you,
And
Michaela.
I hope I can join your book club again with another novel sometime in 22.
Well, make sure that you get on my calendar, and we'll be happy to have you, Dennis.
Okay, Mary,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
Linda, thank you. Michaela, pleasure meeting you,
You're
ladies.
welcome. Yes.
All right.
Thank you,
We'll see
Dennis.
everyone. We'll see everyone at second Friday. Good night, everyone.
Good night.